Good afternoon to all of you. I hope you have a great lunch. So what I will do is a very brief presentation of the situation of food insecurity in the world, which is the SOFI publication that we publish every year in the world. So let me first start with a summary of what we find this year at the global level. So first, hunger is declining, and the prevalence of hunger was 8.7% in 2022, and now is 8.2%. That means 673 million people in chronic hunger. Nearly 2.3 billion people in the world lack regular access to adequate food in 2024, which is an estimate of 28% of the global population which were moderately or severely food insecure. That means undernourished or overnourished. Healthy diets, which is the indicator that we follow since a few years ago, is still out of reach for many people. 2.6 billion people can't afford one healthy diet, and therefore it is down from 2.9 billion people in 2020. The nutrition targets, almost most of them are off track. There has been some progress in stunting, breastfeeding, but none of the 2030 goal targets are on track. Inequalities persist in rural areas, and what we observe is because of COVID-19, women were hit harder, and in the last years, we have seen again that the gap that was recovered after COVID-19 is starting to increase again between men and women. And finally, the topic of this year's SOFI is food prices and how food prices have been increasing. And where we observed that there is a major concern on the increase of food prices. The global food inflation went from 2.3% in 2020 to 13.6% in 2023. And what this means is a 10% increase in prices will mean that 3.5% more people will be food insecure. So this is the overall photograph of the report that we have today. Now here what I'm trying to show is the evolution of the world prevalence of undernourishment and the number of undernourished people. So you will see that there was a significant increase in 2022, 695 million people, and then this progress that we have observed in 2024. Now, where is the progress and where there is no progress? What we see in this graph is that progress has been uneven, with notable improvements in Southern Asia, mostly driven by India, Southeastern Asia, and South America, and deterioration in Western Asia and in most sub-regions of Africa. If we look at the red bar, Africa has increased 1.3% their prevalence of undernourishment, so there is a significant deterioration between 2022 and 2024. There are only 4 or 5 countries in Africa where we have seen an improvement. Asia has declined in minus 1.2%, North and Eastern Asia in minus 0.3%, and Southern Asia in minus 2.9% improvement since 2022. Western Asia increasing 0.8%, Latin America improving minus 0.6%, and this year, in addition to 3 other countries, Brazil was able to move out of the hunger map. And South America has reduced in 0.9% the level of chronic undernourishment. So again, some regions are improving, but Africa is the one that is deteriorating and continues to deteriorate over time. If we look at the evolution and we compare the world with India, Asia, and South Asia, here you will see in the light blue bar is South Asia and Asia in the green bar. And you will see India and Asia, basically, most of the reduction is explained by the improvement that we are observing in India in terms of the reduction of undernourishment, which is faster than the world as a whole, and is the region and the country that has significantly reduced undernourishment. The other indicator that we track is what we call the prevalence of moderate or severe food insecurity. And moderate or severe food insecurity has declined gradually at the global level since 2021, as you can see in the bar. The red refers to severe food insecurity, which is highly correlated with chronic undernourishment, and the lighter orange bar refers to moderate food insecurity. So you have seen an improvement over time, but there has been an improvement in Latin America and the Caribbean, and Africa has deteriorated consistent to what we observed before. So in the right-hand side, you see it across regions, and here we see that the case of North America and Europe was an improvement to 8.1, Latin America and Caribbean also an improvement to 25.8, Asia to 23.3, an improvement, but in the case of Africa, a deterioration to more than 50% of the population facing moderate or severe food insecurity in the world. Now, the other concept and the other indicator is quality of diets, and how much people can afford a healthy diet, which is a diverse diet. Not only have cereals, but also has other high-value commodities like fruits, vegetables, and proteins. And when we look at the evolution, we see that while the affordability of a healthy diet has improved slowly in the world since 2020, progress has been much faster in Southern Asia and in India, which in this case is reflected in the green line for India and Southern Asia in the yellow line. Surprisingly, in the case of South America, the cost of healthy diet continues to be extremely high, and therefore the affordability of healthy diets continues to be extremely high. In all Latin America, mostly in the Caribbean, which has the highest cost of a healthy diet in the world. When we look at the number of people that are unable to afford a healthy diet, we see that it's increasing in low-income countries and in lower middle-income countries, excluding the case of India. And this is important because it's related to food inflation, because the cost of the basket that we are looking at has increased because of food inflation. But the affordability has improved in the case of India, and that is related to wages and to real income, and I will elaborate on that in the next slides. And as I said before, there has been notable progress in reducing child stunting and increasing exclusive breastfeeding, but the world is not on track to achieve any of the global nutrition targets by 2030. And this, of course, is related to hunger, but it's more a longer time and more chronic, and we need to tackle these issues to be able to improve the situation, not only in anemia, but also in the case of overweight and obesity, where we see a significant deterioration in many of the countries, and also in this region, a significant increase in the case of overweight and obesity. Now, what is happening with the prices and why the food price inflation matters so much? First, it's important for political stability. Around the world, 46% to 80% of voters consider food price as a decisive factor in their election choice. You have seen what has happened in many countries of the world because of the inflation, and especially food inflation. For 60% of countries, food products represent more than 25% of their CPI basket. So it also implies macroeconomic stability, and the poorer you are, the more vulnerable you are to food inflation, because the bigger share of your basket is on food. And of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, it affects food security and nutrition. It hurts the most vulnerable people, and that's why it's so important to look at it. Now, what we have observed over time is that in December 2020, the food price inflation on year-to-year basis was 2.3%, very close to the consumer inflation, to the consumer price inflation, the typical IPC. In January 2023, the food price inflation on a year-to-year basis reached 13.6%. And that is where we separate completely from the food inflation, from the overall inflation, meaning that the food commodities, what we consume in the supermarkets, in the retail stores, in the local markets, was increasing faster than the inflation of other commodities. And it imposed a significant challenge, because as I said before, it affects the most vulnerable people, which the biggest part of their basket or their expenditures are on food. Now, please note that this is not commodity prices. This is not the price of wheat, of maize, of soybeans, or corn. It's the food prices, which is the final commodity you consume at the end of the chain. And that is what is increasing at such a velocity. And sometimes we don't see the same correlation or velocity between the core commodities and the final food products, because they have other components. When you eat bread, a very small proportion of it is wheat, but the major part of it is other inputs, which are also increasing, especially the ones related to energy prices. Now, why is this happening? So there are demand-driven factors. There are, of course, supply-driven factors. There is the issue of trade and imports, and also monetary creation to recovery. And as you recall properly, when we had the COVID-19, governments decided to recover from the COVID-19 recession, and they spent 17 trillion in fiscal support to overcome COVID-19 situation, and consumption accelerated. So the demand effect was boosted by this recovery, especially in high-income and middle-high-income countries. But also, on the side of the supply side, there were impacts over the value chains. There were cost of energy prices, which were the result of the war in Ukraine, including the multiplication times 4 of the prices of inputs, of fertilizers. And there were extreme weather events, which in the case of India was extremely relevant. And that affected, of course, the supply side. So you have a demand shift and you have a restriction of the supply. As a consequence of that, prices will go up. There was also the macroeconomic side, which is the appreciation of the US dollar by more than 20% compared to low middle income countries' currencies by 2022. What this means, if you want to import and you are food import dependent, you will have to buy dollars, use more local currency, and of course the cost of those commodities increase. So your food import bill will not only increase because of the price effect, but also because of the exchange rate effect. And this was related to the increase of the interest rates in developed countries to be able to cope with the inflation that they were facing. And finally, there was massive monetary creation supported to the COVID-19 fiscal policies, and the US Fed added $2.2 trillion US dollars in monetary mass in 4 years. So all these elements are interrelated, and sometimes it's super complex to be able to decompose what is a demand effect, what is a supply effect, what is an exchange rate effect, and what is an overall inflation. But what matters is that if we have a 10% increase in food prices, that will imply a 3.5% increase in overall severe and moderate food insecurity in average. It will imply a 4% increase in severe and moderate food insecurity for women, so increases the inequalities between men and women. And it will imply a 5.5% increase in the prevalence of severe wasting among children under 5 years of age. So the impacts are significant, and that's why something that we need to look carefully and try to cope with that. And one way many countries have done is trying to keep also salaries in real terms. And in India, there has been an improvement in terms of salaries, which allows them to cope with these increases in prices. So let me finalize briefly with what can be done and where we need to move forward. First, we need a more coordinated, informed, and restrained policy responses. The more awareness and the more information allow us to have better coordination, because non-coordination could create inefficiencies and could create consequences. The global food markets remain functional with less disruptive trade interventions than before. And here is where the trade restrictions that we're facing today and the trade issues, the uncertainty that we're facing in trade, could have significant impacts. And this is the time where we need, on the contrary, to be able to allow food to flow across borders. The importance of market transparency and timely information has been reaffirmed. This was very clear during COVID-19, that we were able to show the world that there was sufficient production in the world, and there was no reason why food shouldn't be moving across borders. And that's why we start the lemma, there is no health without food, so that we allow to have the health standards in the ports to move food across borders. Robust institutions and sound coordination mechanisms make a difference, and this implies fiscal policies and monetary policies needs to be very well coordinated. And finally, balancing immediate relief with the structural reforms to address future shocks and future price shocks. And this is linked to the topic that we're going to discuss in the panel on all of these topics, in the sense that all these uncertainties, not only climate issues, the increasing frequency of climate events, the increasing intensity of climate events, the uncertainty on trade, all this will be affecting conflict, of course, and conflict will be affecting them. So it's the time that we start to think how we can increase our resilience and minimize the potential risks behind these topics and behind the conflicts that we will be facing. So thank you so much, and now we move to the panel.